and work hard. Thank you. Obviously that was a setup. I did wake up in a cold sweat last night thinking, okay, I've coached my co-conspirators over here, you did a great job. I woke up in a cold sweat last night and said to myself, I like to play practical jokes. What if they turn the tables on me and don't ask for more? My idea also was to give the first speech of a graduation nature in the history of the world where the audience said in mass, gee, I wish he'd talked a little longer. And event coordinator Lizzie Duncan is back here, and I bet she had a small moment of terror and said, he's just crazy enough to do that, and dinner won't be ready for 45 minutes. Let me start by saying you're a great bunch of 55 young men and women, lots of smart, talented, genuinely nice human beings in this class. It's been a pleasure to be around you as a class sponsor and a faculty member and a coach. If you're a parent, you're related to one of these kids, you should be very proud for helping us get to this point. It's very unusual for me to give a talk like this, maybe once every 10 years, so here goes. I admit to being more than a little nervous. And I really don't like the idea of just reading a speech, to tell you the truth. I have one here. I sort of know what I want to say, but I might go off on a sidetrack a little bit and get off the rails, and I just ask you to be a little patient with me, and I'll try to get back on the rails. Many of my colleagues kept asking me if they could read my speech, if they could coach me, if maybe they would want to listen to this. And I guess I should have taken a hint of some sort. But the truth is, I didn't take anyone up on their offers, and so this is going to be pretty much Bob's deal, unvarnished. To his credit, Father Thomas didn't even ask me what I was going to say, so that's interesting. Giving this type of talk is a risky proposition. I think it should be personal. It helps if it's personal, and it's better if it's personal. But if it's personal and you make things really positive, to me it sort of sounds like you're bragging, right? And if it's personal and you get sort of negative, it sounds like you're whining. And if you go all professorial and you start making lists and here's now you should do this and this and this, then it comes across as being a know-it-all. And in my family, my brothers can tell you this, there's three things you really shouldn't be. You shouldn't be a bragger, you shouldn't be a whiner, and you shouldn't be a know-it-all. So here I am. I'm just going to let the chips fall where they may, because I'm here and you ask and all that. So you might expect me to talk some about technology, but I'm really not going to do that. It's not that interesting. I'll tell you this funny story about a server thing that I had last night. Many of you know that I live at a place called the Jump Off Community Land Trust, which is 6 miles from here. It's an intentional community. We build our own houses. I live in a straw bale house, solar this, rainwater collection. And here I feel a little bit like Holden Caulfield, and I'll simply say I really don't feel much like talking about it. In part because many of you, and you don't lie, when you hear the word sustainability, your ears are gone. You're not listening anymore, right? And my brothers and others will be back there and say, oh boy, here he goes into his hippy-dippy mode again. So I'm going to skip that. But if you are, I do think what we do at the Land Trust is pretty interesting, and if you're really interested in it, just give me a call and I'll bring a group out and be happy to talk about this. I did a bit of research on these kind of talks, and the most common thread is indeed follow your dreams and work hard and yada yada. And I also learned that exactly 0% of audiences remember these talks 1 year later. And so that sort of takes the pressure off a little bit. part of the reason you don't remember is you're trying to figure out what you're doing after school, after ceremony, how quickly you can get in the line. The parents, I was a parent a few years ago, and I remember I had all kinds of things on my mind other than what whoever was up here was saying. And the faculty over here, I can guarantee you, and I'll look eyeball to eyeball, I can guarantee you they're thinking about their Annies that they've got in about 2 hours. Am I right about that? So it's got nothing to do with me, and so I don't take that personally. So all of that takes the pressure off a bit. What I have in mind is do a little storytelling. Hopefully, if this gets too long, you can yank me. 4 or 5 pieces of advice that I think make sense. Maybe you wish I had known at your age. My original list of items was 53, and so Lizzie Duncan asked me every day this week, "How long is this going to be? How long is this going to be?" And so I just had to cut. And the second piece of this, beyond a few words of advice, is what I love about the school. By the way, thanks to the class for asking me. I guess that's how it works. Father Thomas called me one day and said the senior class has asked, very graciously asked if you would be willing to give the baccalaureate address. I said, "Me? Are you sure?" I don't teach, and haven't coached until recently. And he actually was, as I said, he was very gracious about it and acted like there was a certain amount of enthusiasm for me giving this talk. And so I appreciated that. But, I've been around 17-year-olds quite a bit myself, and I'm going to digress just a little bit. I had a great pleasure working with Coach Hargis this spring with the softball team. Girls softball, great bunch of young ladies. And other than being teamed up with Rachel Maldy for the last 12 years, coaching softball was maybe the best thing I've ever done here. And sometime in the middle of the season, Micaiah and Allie and Ashley and Rita started calling me Hoagland. I don't know where that came from. So I became Hoagland, and I accepted that. And usually I don't talk too much, but one night at a game in Nashville, I don't know quite where it came from. I gave in a fit of real frankness, I gave an assessment of their skill level. I'll just put it that way. And they're great girls. We had a great season, but we didn't have a lot of success. And so, I could sense that I'd sort of hurt some feelings there. But they came back pretty strong, and not long after that, I became Honest Hoagland. So back to this issue of being selected to talk, I can imagine in the chapel they were discussing this, and Rita said, "What about Hoagland?" And maybe Micaiah said, "Well, what about Honest Hoagland? That's a good idea." And the rest of them said, "Whatever." I've been around 17-year-olds, as I said before. It's a little intimidating to talk in a group like this, like in Sewanee. There's a bunch of PhDs and English majors and all kinds of folks out there that probably should be here instead of me, and lots of parents. I looked at resumes of parents and histories of parents, and I know many people who would be more appropriate for this. But anyhow, you asked me to do this, and so here I am. I did wake up this morning also and realized probably what you wanted to do was to hear the Purdue engineering yell. So that's e to the x, dy dx, e to the y dx, cosine, secant, tangent, sine, 3.14159, square root, cube root, BTU, slipstick, slide rule, yay, Purdue! That's a little inside baseball. That's in chapel. Miss Aspen has this wonderful tradition where when you all are accepted to a college, we have an announcement of students accepted to college. About 10 years ago, we were going through this, and we had a habit where faculty members, if it was their alma mater, they would say something. And so, I was pretty quiet then too in terms of the chapel. I didn't have much to say, and this is randomly one day, one of our students got into Purdue, and that just came like that, without plan or forethought. And everybody looked at me. It was pretty funny. That's a yell. Purdue. I shouldn't assume that you all know that Purdue is a state school in Indiana, agriculture and engineering. I lived in a house where we had to learn that. We had to stand up in front of the seniors and do the yell at the end of the evening. And as long as I'm on a roll here, there was Purdue, related to Purdue and all that. There was the engineering yell that I just did, but there was also an agricultural yell. Okay? And I've done this once or twice, just once or twice. It's pretty rare, but I'll bet my brothers don't even know this one, but it goes like this. Hogs, corn, cattle, hay, liquid ammonia, NPK, protein concentrate, supplement A, lambs, rams, wethers used, pitchforks, scoop shovels, yay, privet. Alright, so here's the first. I've got 4 or 5 pieces of sort of unsolicited advice. The first one I've got a title of Keep Moving, which is a pretty simple thing, I guess, but you've all been in a situation that school has asked you to be active, required you to be active. And Monday morning, there's nobody that's going to require you to be active. And the simple advice is keep walking, keep jogging, keep playing tennis, take steps on the elevator, or take steps up the steps instead of the elevator. Well, you could take steps on the elevator. That'd be better than just standing there on the elevator. I hate the idea of exercise, but I do try to walk 10 miles a week. That's sort of my thing. And so, I also think of myself as being 23, which is, I know that's a little strange. I don't look 23, but I get this delusional stuff from my mother, and my brothers will appreciate this. She lived well into her 90s, was a very active person. And do you all know what Meals on Wheels are? Yes. Where in small communities, people will fix hot meals and then deliver those to shut-ins in the community. Well, the connection here is that my mother, when she was in her 80s, she was delivering Meals on Wheels in our community. And you sort of have to know her, but the idea was she would say, well, some of those people are getting pretty old. And I wasn't going to tell this story, but it's just so sweet. I have to tell it. One more story about my mother. Bear with me. As I said, she lived into her 90s. She had 13 or 14 grandchildren, and she had a habit when the first one graduated from high school of making a quilt for them. It was a really nice thing. And so 35 years ago, she started making a quilt for her first grandson. And it turns out I'm the youngest son, and my daughter would then be her youngest granddaughter. Well, when my mother was about 87 and we were visiting her in Indiana, and we were about to leave, she came out with a box. And Dale was in 6th grade. You know what's coming here, don't you? She came out with a box and said, I may not be around when Dale graduates from high school, but here's your quilt. And it turns out she wasn't around, but we did open up the box when Dale finished high school, and we put it on her bed, and I guess I remarked, "You're all around, Mom. You're all around." My second piece of advice is make music. Don't just listen to music. Now, many of you are talented musicians, so I'm really not talking to you. But some of you are in the same situation I was in when I was your age. I thought music is what other people did. And I did that, frankly, for almost 40 years. I enjoy listening to people like Jay Ferris and Miss Butler and Buddy Van Dyke as much as anybody. I really enjoy that. But in order to create music, to make your own music, is another level of fun, in my opinion. So, sort of related to this, I've got this working title that I'll give to all you Sewanee writers called "We're a Nation of Spectators." I think it applies to both sports and music. We're sort of in this mode where we watch sports and we listen to music. We ought to be playing sports and we ought to be making music, is I guess, if I'm going to be a little preachy about it. It's easy to get. A harmonica doesn't cost very much, an acoustic guitar, an electric piano with headphones you can have in your dorm room. And another key to this for me was it's hard to just make music in a vacuum by yourself. So find another small group of people, this is my advice, and sit around and try to make music. This worked for me about 10 years ago. My neighbor called me, and Carolyn, and said, let's get together Saturday night and play music. And I said, well, that's a great idea, but I don't play music. I don't do instruments and so forth. He said, that's okay. Just find a guitar and show up, and we'll sit around the table and do something. And so every Saturday night for the last 10 years, we go to 3 different houses and sit around the kitchen table and we play music, and I'm still not very good. If you listen to Buddy and Miss Butler, they'll say that I'm tone deaf and I can't keep the beat. But playing with friends is a way to make that happen. So, get a harmonica, get a guitar, get an electric piano if you're not in the music business. And in addition to listening to great music, my advice is to try to make some music. I'll digress a little bit there and say, most of you that know a little bit about music know that there's a lot of folk songs that you can play with 3 guitar chords, G, C, and D. And so, in the early days, learning 3 chords with my older brain was a little complicated, so I learned to play G around the kitchen table. My friends were pretty good musicians, so I would keep my fingers on the G chord, and every time the song got to G, I would strum the guitar. And it worked. And a couple of years later, I learned to play the C chord. A couple of years later, and now I can really hang in there in a G, C, and D type song. We jokingly call ourselves the Bob Hoagland and the Whole Wheat Crackers. And the deal here is we play for fun. We play by ourselves with friends around the table. We played in public twice. One time was at the Senior Citizen Center in Sewanee. I don't know exactly why they did that, but I will say that I sort of found my groove there. I'm serious here. I knew I wasn't the best musician in the group. But what I had to offer maybe is I could get up in front and sort of do the lively banter and let the musicians really do this sort of thing. And then I sort of saw myself, frankly, as the eye candy of the group. This was at the Senior Citizen Center. Alright, so if you're going to try to remember one thing, maybe this next one is it. Because I'm throwing a lot of stuff out here, and only so much is going to stick. Here's what maybe is a takeaway. Spend your money on experiences and not things. I have a neighbor named Josh. Lives in a modest house with a modest car and a modest lifestyle. And he happens to be a big fan of a group called Fish. Now, I suppose most of you know who Fish is. I really didn't, but I've come to believe it's maybe the Grateful Dead of this current generation or something. And, well, remember I said, Josh, modest house, modest lifestyle, modest car, paid for car, all that. He's been to 93 Fish concerts. Now, maybe that's not the best example in the world. But you sort of get the idea. You're more likely to, here's what somebody told me a long time ago, you're more likely in life to regret the things you did not do than the things you did do. I've lived by that for a long time. So my advice is, if your choice is to get a decent used car and still hike the national parks of the American West, or go to Bonnaroo, instead of buying a new car and putting it on payments, then buy the used car and go to the national parks, or go to Bonnaroo, or do something like that. If your choice is getting a $10,000 wedding ring, or spending your honeymoon traveling around the world, I guess it should be obvious what I think the answer should be. I guess this is probably a little off the tracks, but I'd say if you're a boy and somebody's insisting that they have a $10,000 diamond wedding ring, so keep moving, make music, spend your money on experiences and not things. Cultivate a love for reading. Julie Jones will be with me on this one, I hope. I hope that 12 years of schooling hasn't convinced you that the reason to read a book is to do a book report. I married a reader. First 20 years of our marriage, she would read easily a book a week. After acknowledging the joy she gets from marrying me, I'd say that the reading is the second great joy of her life. I sort of prefer magazines to books. Those of you that are not familiar, the young people who are not familiar with magazines, are sort of like web pages. They're printed on paper and distributed through the mail. They have a thing called an editor who actually reads it in advance and maybe sort of gets it right before you actually blow it out there. So here's a suggestion, a concrete suggestion, and truly, go to a bookstore, go to Barnes & Noble, scan the magazine rack, and take a piece of paper and write down magazines that look interesting to you. Make a list, and get a variety of things. And then when an aunt or an uncle or somebody asks you for a birthday present or a Christmas present, pull out your list and say, how about an annual subscription to the Atlantic Monthly or something along those lines. I think that then you're all prepared. Books are similar, I guess, in terms of that sort of thing. I might suggest, as many, I'm sure, faculty, to have a permanent set of books. Books that you keep with you your whole life. 30, 40, 50, 80 books. And they stay with you no matter what. And they become your friends. Why on earth would you keep a book after you've read it? Well, I'm sure many of you readers know that it's interesting to go back to a book. I read a book by John Steinbeck called Travels with Charlie when I was in my 20s. It spoke to my wanderlust and joy of being on the road and doing things. And I read that book about every 10 years, and it means something a little different to me every time I read it. And so I guess, not to put too fine a point on it, that's sort of what I think about having a permanent collection of books. Now here's maybe a second takeaway. Choose wisely the people with whom you spend your time. Did I get the grammar right, Mrs. Corder? Choose wisely the people with whom you choose to spend your time. If you're stressing out about college or your next step or whatever it is, let me just say, and this is dangerous in a college prep crowd, my feeling is probably not that big a deal. In the grand scheme of things, the single most important decision in my mind you'll make is who are the people you choose to spend your time with. Who are the close circle of maybe, most of us, I think the experts say we can handle 150 friends, maybe. We can handle 5 to 10 close friends, is about it. And so the question is, who do you spend your time with? And I'm going to, I'm skipping some things in the interest of time here, but the thing I guess I would say in terms of marriage and life partner, this goes back to a movie I saw when I was 10 years old. I didn't watch many movies as a kid. People my age you wouldn't understand this, but I maybe saw 12 or 15 movies by the time I was your age, all in the movie theater. There's no DVRs, DVDs. And so I went to see Mary Poppins with my mother and father, and those kinds of things that were happening in the 1960s. But we went to see a movie called Shenandoah with Jimmy Stewart in it. And, that's a lot of horses and guns and things shooting and all kinds of exciting things for a 10-year-old boy. But the one scene I remember, maybe some of you remember this is a great scene. Jimmy Stewart is the patriarch of a Virginia family, and he's trying to keep his family out of the American Civil War. And it's somewhere in Virginia, as I said. And the story is that his wife has passed away during childbirth, Martha, many, many years earlier. And one young soldier wants to marry his daughter. So he arrives in the den. And those of you that know Jimmy Stewart, the Jimmy Stewart character that some of you know from other movies, is sitting there at den with his pipe. And the young man says that he would like to marry his daughter, Jimmy Stewart's character's daughter. And Jimmy Stewart looks at him and says, "Do you like her?" I was 10 years old, honestly. At 10 years old, I remember this scene. And the young earnest soldier said, "Yes, I love her, sir. I love her with all my heart. I love her." And he said, That's not what I asked. I asked if you liked her." And that, again, not to belabor the point, that really has stuck with me. If you're thinking about a life partner in any sense of the word, it's great to be in love. Over time, it's better to like somebody. And what the Jimmy Stewart character said, as I recall, was, I didn't love Martha when I married her. I liked her. I liked her a lot, he said. You can hear Jimmy Stewart saying that, right? But I came to love her over time. All right, so one last little story, I guess. When I was in first grade, people don't believe this is true, it's true, and some of the faculty have heard this before, I'm sorry. I don't know how people in the clergy tell a fresh story every week without repeating themselves. So I'm repeating myself here. This is, when I was in the first grade, a little public school in Covington, Indiana, Mrs. Staggs said, among the many, many rules, one of the rules was there was to be no cussing. Well, I don't know if you know what cussing is, using bad words. But the truth of it is, I had no idea what cussing meant. I lived in a house where cussing didn't happen. There were no televisions, and I was way too shy to ask what cussing meant. So, for some reason, this is the mind of a 6-, 7-year-old, I thought cussing had something to do with being on the sidewalk. So, every day at recess, I would go outside, but I would walk up and down the sidewalk because I was terrified I would get off the sidewalk, cuss, and get in big trouble. The reason I tell that story is at this school, I don't think students would spend very much time on the metaphorical sidewalk. There would be an adult somewhere that notices. I'm into the things I love about SAS, by the way, so just so you have an idea that this is going to end. Adults are paying attention. Second thing, international students. Those of you in this room who were born in a different country, who have come to this country, try to look at each one of you. What you do coming here is absolutely incredible. Very often you're 14 years old, a different culture, different food, learning calculus, for goodness sakes, in something that is not your native language. Most of us can't learn calculus in our own language, of course. And so I simply say, I just say it's amazing. It's a great thing about this school, and what you as international students add to this community, I think we forget about sometimes, those of us that are here every day, but it's a huge deal. And I suspect people that come from the outside and are not here often are amazed when I read this list of students based upon their birthplace or country of citizenship. South Korea, Jamaica, Vietnam, Singapore, Taiwan, Mexico, Rwanda, Germany, Thailand, Cuba, Japan, Lithuania, South Africa, Spain, and Saudi Arabia, just in the current student body. And I can't really mention this without at least, or certainly without acknowledging Linda Ashby and Sharon Zachow, who are a big part of what makes that all happen. So, the second thing is the international nature of our school is a really cool thing. The third thing is our connection to nature. Once again, I suspect we take that for granted far more than we should. It's an incredible thing. The great Cindy Potter might call it the natural world. The Japanese have a concept that I've heard about, and this is, I'm not going to mention this at any great length, but it's worth investigating. It's very interesting to me. I wonder if Takumi knows about this. Japanese have a thing called forest bathing. And it's the idea of spending time in the woods. We all think a walk through the woods has a psychological benefit. There are Japanese scientists who feel strongly that walking through the woods not only has a psychological benefit, it has a physiological benefit. It changes you chemically by spending time in the woods. It's a very interesting idea. We have interesting, incredible students who are here. All of you, both day, boarding, United States, international. And I would say this, Sherry Bergman does a beautiful magazine. I hope you all get to see that as it comes to you. But my idea here is that she doesn't get to tell the best stories. She sort of tells the public stories. And I know that all of you do things that nobody knows about in service to God and our community. It's a big deal. You quietly do those kinds of things. And of course you might say, how does he know this? Well, I'm the IT guy. And if you're new to this world, the IT guy knows everything. So, truly, the volunteer, I know there are stories here that people don't know. Things that you are doing. And I'll just leave it at that. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And finally, I'm going to read this one because I really don't want to go off track too much. A word about the grand liberal Christian tradition that is the embodiment of this school. The beauty and simplicity of the Christian message as exhibited all around us here at SAS. Love, acceptance, forgiveness, second chances, and redemption, it's all here. As a bit of an outlier, I have always felt completely welcome here. I've actually felt more welcome here, dare I say, than I may at almost any public high school in the United States. I'm eternally grateful to have worked in a setting for the last 12 years. The tone was set in the early days by Bill Wade, who would calmly, regularly, and with conviction remind us that we are all children of God. So now I ask you to think 50 years ahead. The alumni, 50 years. I think it's useful to do that. The alumni office will contact you. There may be a new gym. There may be a new Simmons Hall. There may be a new McCrory Hall. But the chapel behind you, I can guarantee, will be there. Most of your teachers will be, all of your teachers will be gone, except Susan Core. Still be in room 9. So it's reasonable to expect, the way this works, at least half of you will come back here to this place physically in 2064 and stand on those chapel steps right over there. I'm a little delusional like my mother and a bit of an optimist, and I'm hoping you'll invite me to come to your 50th high school reunion. I will only be 109. Seems possible, right? We currently have a major fundraising effort to help renovate the chapel. And I would simply say, if the chapel has meant anything to you and your family, please contact Tim Graham or anyone in the development office and help us financially make sure that chapel is there 50 years from now. Tim's here, right? I didn't get permission, but I guess that's okay. Now to the seniors, I wish you the best. You and I will leave campus soon and on to the next big thing in our lives. And here I'm going to draw from a book, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. What is that feeling when you're driving away from people and they recede on the plane till you see their specks dispersing? It's the two huge world vaulting us, and it's goodbye. But we lean forward to the next crazy venture beneath the skies. Thank you.